Hi, welcome back to the Dylan Rounds case. Welcome if you're currently here in the live premiere, appreciate it. Today we're going to be doing a focused, serious video looking at the possibilities that Dylan Rounds was buried multiple times in different areas. And what Candice Cooley has said in recent time on one of the East Idaho news channels is that over the course of months, when K9 cadaver dogs went down to the area of Lucin, Utah, there was two particular spots in which the dogs reacted in a very specific way, hinting as if there was a scent, there was something there of interest, possible evidence. And Candice Cooley was referring to it, saying that's the possible location where Dylan Rounds was first buried and then moved on later, which would tie in with the whole desecration charge, as that's a form of desecration, concealing a body, but then removing it and hiding it elsewhere. It does fall under that bracket. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We can also do a map analysis as well to get the visual sense of it, like the satellite imagery. Try and make sense, see if we can generate any key ideas, locations, coordinates for that second spot. We already have the first spot noted down, which we'll be taking a look at today, the grain shed, a key place of interest. Although Candice Cooley and Justin Rounds have said, we've looked in that area, we've ticked it off the list, we spent many hours going around, back and forth, there is nothing to see there, there is nothing, to find. Whilst that may be true, you can at least say with a counterpoint with what Candice Cooley previously said before saying that was there was something there. There once was. But because direct action wasn't taken at the time, kind of fell through, right? Problematic. Though there's no harm in retracing these key locations and spots where Dylan Rounds possibly was at a certain stage. Maybe there's a certain trail, a certain direction you could follow, right? No harm in doing. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. We do have material from the grain shed, looking back at that because, it's literally there. The soil disturbance, the hole, this could be one of the key things what Candice Cooley was referring to with the dog. So we're looking at all of that, we're analysing it, maps too, and we can check back Weezer's comment just to re-acknowledge her points from how we're going to tie on into this video, right? It's all under control, don't worry. As for the comments, we don't need to check the previous videos because the comments aren't that many in numbers, right? All I will say is, if you haven't checked my previous videos out, make sure to do so. Most recently, within the last day or two, I've uploaded so many videos of decent length as well. I've not even cut back on that. I've been going all out recently, like really all in, okay? So make sure to catch up on those videos because I have uploaded back-to-back ones most recently. Some links will be down below and other links too if you wish to view them again. As well, shout out to Guidance, shout out to another individual and maybe another individual for their super chats last night. Very good of them. So I appreciate that. And yeah, that's what we're going to be looking at today. And if we do have time, we'll also look at another article later on if there is time. Just check for consistencies or inconsistencies there. So a bit of an interactional hands-on video once again. I think we should get right into it now. As I said, to kick things off, we've got Weezer's comment here. I'm just simply going to read it out once again so it rejogs your memory and maybe you've got some additional thoughts and reactions. As said, everyone watching right now, welcome. Feel free to make use of the live chat on the right-hand side. Share your thoughts, opinions and reactions. Okay? So Weezer said, I heard that the truck leaving the shed was a larger truck, I believe a dually, so that wouldn't match Brenner's blue truck. If you're wondering what the opening of this sentence is to do with, it's to do with a supposed event which happened on the 28th of May 2022, the day Dylan was supposedly murdered, right? And it was later on in the day, the 28th, around 3 p.m. or just after 3 p.m, when a truck was leaving the grain shed property and some people nearby known as Walt and Michelle near Sun Tunnels were passing by and passed a truck leaving the grain shed. You know, it's kind of interesting, right? What was it all about? And Weezer is just adding some additional comments here about it, right? So a dually, whatever that is, and that it was on the larger side. Also, Weezer says, Kurt said a couple of days ago that Dylan was heading to Dan Iverson's to take apart. Dan Iverson being the farmer which Dylan Rounds worked for when doing custom farming before Dylan went missing again. Goes on to say, Kurt was going to help him because he had tools, but Dan Iverson already had the equipment apart waiting on the parts, so Kurt wasn't needed. He said Dylan was only gone about 15 minutes. Kurt didn't see Dylan when he passed back through Montello. In Candice Cooley's interview, she said the dogs had 2 final hits. So this part here, what Weezer is referring to, is from the East Idaho News Channel interview in recent time or so. And this is the main part of this video, right? What we're talking about, the theme. So yeah, Candice Cooley saying that dogs over the course of months had 2 final hits, one being the grain shed and the other undisclosed, still to this day. In my mind, that makes me believe that Dylan was moved a couple of times. I wonder if the second spot was near the pond, since there seems to be so much focus there. There's one way of looking at it, right? We'll do a poll right now. It's a little bit early, but we'll do one anyway, a focused one. The poll can be, besides, you know, the grain shed, where do you think the other location was for the final hit, where the dogs acted out as if there was something there, or there was Dylan possibly once there? Where do you think that second spot is, the undisclosed place? We can do it like vaguely, give a few options, and you can just share your thoughts and opinions. Is it A, near to the pond, like what Weezer says? Is it B, closer to Dylan's farm? Is it C, near to Don's place? Let's just randomly say. And D can be somewhere else, right? It's kind of vague. We're only working with what we have, right? Do you think that maybe Dylan was buried in a part of the wash and then removed and moved further down the wash? I don't know, it would seem a bit pointless, that. Really, if you're going to pick a temporary spot when disposing of someone, it might as well be nearby, right? As close as possible, just to briefly conceal, hide, and then later on in the day or the following day, you go back, unearth, let's say Dylan, and take him maybe a bit further afar in a more, I don't know, hidden area, and do a better job when disposing of Dylan, right? That's what I would think. I would say that the first burial must be the closest, and the second one further away, if you're working out like that. So be sure to vote right now. Let me know your thoughts. So what we have here is photo inside of the grain shed. So as I said, this was one of the final hit spots where the dogs went to, sniffed it out, reacted in a certain way as if giving off that they found something, or that they can sense, like a scent possibly, right? This is what it looks like, the grain shed property, the place where Dylan Rounds supposedly parked his grain truck inside of the grain shed, which looked to be of a success, because when you fast forward on past Dylan's death, June 2nd, spring cleaning, Brenner had to drive it out. So Dylan must have parked it in. And it just makes you think, you know, was Dylan taken out as soon as he got out of his grain truck? Was it like an ambush? Or was it dragged out a little bit longer as a one-on-one confrontation? Makes you think, right? Though at the time of it taking place, you'd think that the grain truck would be a bit of an obstruction, right? This is what makes me think, and we go back to it. If this area that dogs were around and it was a final hit, a place of interest, that something was once here, wouldn't the grain truck have been obstructing the space where that hole was dug by the police, FBI, right? So Because people have said, Candice Cooley has said that the grain truck can't fit in completely, that it does stick out. So that being the case, where that hole is, the truck would have been on top of it, right? So if Dylan was to be buried here, the truck would have been moved and then reversed back in, right? That's what I'm thinking. I mean, let me know your thoughts if you notice anything else of interest as we're in this area. If you're wondering how the photo was taken, when, where, back in 2022, I think early mid-range days, and it was by Salty Pancakes, okay? He did upload it to YouTube at the time, but obviously it's not retrievable anymore because the channel being terminated. There we go, we got it a bit up close. So further back, what we're looking at there, right-hand side of the hole, is that back there, right? You see that little dirt mound, or mound of dirt, okay? That's what we're looking at. So, you know, you look at the hole, right? It's not that deep. So obviously they didn't dig deep in anticipation that Dylan's bones are there. So they must have had an idea or some inclination that it wasn't going to lead directly to finding Dylan. I mean, it's one of those things. How far do you dig deep? Does anyone know? How far would you dig deep? If you've got a canine dog, you've got a cadaver dog sniffing an area, they all bark or do whatever to get your attention. You go to that spot, and then what? You start digging the hole up. But then how deep do you go down? Do you go as deep until the dog stops reacting, right? And then maybe the dog might move its head towards that mound of dirt you've dug up, and then it starts sniffing it. And then the police are like, oh, something is within this mound of dirt. Let's look for it. And they might not find anything, but there's a certain scent about that dirt. So then they take a soil sample or so and go down to the labs and get it checked out. And then it might have traces of Dylan's vomit, Dylan's blood, you know, something like that, right? And I'll just say it now before we forget, because it's a very important point, right? Candice Cooley said that these two final hits, both the grain shed property inside and as well the undisclosed place, both failed to retrieve anything of interest, evidence from those locations, as no forensics took place in any of those two locations. That is really bad, isn't it? You know, it's just delayed, not done quick enough. When they do finally come, it's too late because whatever traces of DNA were in those spots have just gone, worn away with time, right? Just follow me here. So we're applying it to the grain shed property, that it was a final hit spot, a place of interest. The dog's reacting here, but they may have found something, but no forensics were done in time, so it was all lost. Then why is the shack lady saying that biological matter was found inside of the grain shed property? Why is it then being passed down to why Candice Howard ended up talking about saying that biological matter or some sort of DNA evidence was found inside of the grain shed? When we refer all the way back to Candice Cooley, who said nothing was found here because no forensics were done, and they were too late to do it anyway because whatever was there just disappeared, lost with time. So who is telling the truth? Everyone in the chat right now, I want to know your thoughts. What is going on, right? Sure, this is like way back in the past, but has it been talked about since? Not really. As for these two final hit spots where the dogs reacted to, on the East Idaho News Channel, which was like weeks ago now, I never knew about it. I never heard of it before then. Candice Cooley only just recently spoke about it in a casual way as well. And I'm just surprised she never brought it up earlier on in the case, right? Because sure, it could have been arguably an important piece in the case, but because it didn't lead to anything being found, what was the point keeping it a secret, right? I understand throughout the case there would have been moments where they couldn't, give evidence, show evidence to the general public at the time because it could harm the case, right? But that's to do with when they found something. In this case, what we're talking about is stuff that wasn't found or retrieved because it wasn't done in time. So why does it need to be kept a secret this long? You get what I'm saying? So I don't know if Salty Pancakes was aware of what was found supposedly here. I don't know if Salty Pancakes and Glor and Dellen were aware the fact that no forensics was done here, but the dogs did react in a specific way, maybe near that hole, which was eventually dug up. You get what I'm saying? Not looking. It's just very confusing, right? And I'll just summarise it one more time. Grain shed property, hole dug up. Was something retrieved, yes or no? Candice Cooley has always said, not really referred to it, but in recent time Candice Cooley said that dogs reacted, forensics was never done, followed up, so it was a waste. Nothing was found. Then you got the Shack Lady and Candice Howard saying that something was found here. I don't understand that. I thought Shack Lady, or maybe just at least Candice Howard, was in contact with Candice Cooley. So why is Candice Cooley saying nothing has been found, but Candice Howard, it was saying at some point that something was found, and the Shack Lady saying that too? You got two different stories, right, from two different people, or three different people, whatever. It's not good. As said, leave your thoughts in the chat right now. Do you know what's going on? Yeah. Anyway, let's just visualize more on the image, what's in front of us right now. What else do we see? So once again, you see those cans, beer cans, to do with Brenner. So when it came to June 2nd spring cleaning, as Brenner called it when confronted by sheriff, cleaning up rubbish. Clearly, that never happened because there is still rubbish on the ground, onwards when the photo was taken. So clearly Brenner was disposing of something else, which was never recovered, which is a shame. As for back here, you've got, I think, hay for horses, because there is a picture of a horse on the side of that bag. I always point out to this back here, can you see that shovel? The shovel propped up against the back of the grain shed wall. Do you think that was ever used when digging this hole? Let me know. It does look a little bit dirty, a bit muddy, so it could have been used and just put aside when they finished with it. As for back here, we don't really see too much of interest. That appears to be like a pack for maybe Bud Light, some kind of beer can holder, where you'd buy them from the shop. There's a few bits of wood, a bit of splinters, some stones, a little bit of rock, and then the dirt mound there, which came from that hole, right? Is there a reason why they never filled the hole back in? Bit of a random question. Is it just because it's like a checklist? By digging up a hole and leaving it as it is, it reminds you that it's already been checked, ticked off the list. Now, I remember when Lance Kelly and Ty Cobbin, when they were searching way back in the past together, and they were around the Boulder Eagle mountain range in, Montello, Nevada, around that area. And I kept seeing like these little ribbons, like pink, red, blue, near to different mine shafts. Now, was that done by them or somebody else exploring the areas to tick it off the list? Anyone know or remember? Another thing I noticed, I don't have it with me right now, but basically, one of the photos taken back in 2022, was it around August time or slightly onwards after that? Possibly slightly onwards. And a photo was taken looking towards Lucin Pond, and the fence nearby, the perimeter, on the post of it, there was like a blue band wrapped around it saying, "You are not alone," or something. Who put that there? Was it Candice Cooley, the family? Was it some kind of search and rescue? Is it some kind of marker, beacon to say, we've been here? I don't know. just like these little questions I have that do pop up in my mind at times. If anyone can answer them, feel free to do so in the live chat or the comment section down below. Yeah. And of course, to spread awareness of these important discussions and topics, especially today, feel free to leave additional comments down below and like the video to spread awareness of this whole talk, because you don't hear it talked about much at all, especially in recent time. Yeah, the odd person might be trying to search for Dylan, but no one seems to be questioning the case anymore, right? I guess when you look at it in one way, it seems like people are at that moment where they're like, if we don't hear any information about new evidence found, then we're not interested. If we don't hear any follow-up with Brenner confessing, then we're not interested. Anything else in between talked about which could be valid and still important isn't of interest to majority of the general public. That's how it seems to be. It is unfortunate. I know recently we may have had an influx in people coming on back, but that was to do with like the hat being found, the cap, which was seen as potential new evidence. So that's why people were interested in that. And then I guess the first breaking news update by Candice Cooley. But ever since, it's kind of tracked back a little, though my focus has not worn away, right? Of course, videos in between to lighten stuff up, and I don't know, just a bit of cleansing here and there can definitely help for sure. Anyway, what's the next image? So yeah, we've seen that before. Move on to this one. So this is almost like looking straight down at the hole itself, right? As said, it's not that deep, okay? What I said in the past, right, when I saw the hole for the first time and people were like trying to make sense of it, it was like, that hole is not big enough for Dylan to be buried in, right? And I think most people could agree with that. Some at the time were suggesting that maybe there's a bit more to it. Maybe it could be like an item, some kind of evidence which has been buried there, like the handgun, a firearm, which may have been used to take Dylan Rounds out, and then it was dug up and then retrieved. That doesn't seem to be the case, right? So what else could it be? I know that talk about biological matter, but that really does seem to be a bit dodgy in terms of, was it or was it not? Because Candice Cooley says nothing was found there. Yeah. But when looking at that hole, you could say it still applies to Dylan Rounds, i.e. buried there temporarily. Yeah. I mean, there was another suggestion that maybe Dylan Rounds inside of the grain shed, attacked by Brenner in some way. Dylan fell to the ground and basically fell near that area. And as he bled out, the blood soaked into the ground. And then Dylan may be dragged away elsewhere, right? So that blood seeping into the ground back there, a form of DNA, right? A form of evidence. Fast forward onwards, dogs coming into this area, sniffing it out, sensing that possible blood maybe. Or if it's not blood, vomit, right? And then at some point deciding to dig it up, right? Now my question is, when it was dug up, does that fall in line with when Candice Cooley said no forensics were done? Because from what the shack lady has said, that it was the police or the FBI that dug that hole themselves. Now, if the actual authority was present at the time to dig up that hole, did they not go for a soil sample? Did they not take something away, right? It would make sense if the shack lady was and is saying that a form of like biological matter was found there. I would understand it, right? But for Candice Cooley to say no forensics were done in that spot, then why was the hole dug up then, right? You get what I'm saying? If we're tying it more with what Candice Cooley has been saying, it would make more sense if it was under the conditions that it was Candice Cooley or Justin Rounds that dug up the hole themselves and then reported it to the police or reported it to some kind of authorities, and they never followed it up, right? But if it truly was the police or FBI to dig this hole up in the first place and not follow through with it, with forensics, then that seems very problematic and very bad, to be honest. You know, it's like they're doing half the job. They should do the whole thing, right? You're going to dig it up, you should retrieve something from that hole. Soil sample, bone fragment, a bit of cloth, whatever that's present there, you should take something away and check it up in the labs. Yet, from what Candice Cooley has said, that never happened. Too late. Too little, too late. Yet Shack Lady is saying biological matter was found there. At the end of the day, even if something was found there, like biological matter, what does it really do? Well, I guess it proves that Dylan Rounds was once here in some way, whether it be buried in that ground or falling down on top of the ground and then vomit coming out or blood coming out and seeping into the ground. Does it lead to Dylan Rounds being found? Absolutely not, right? But what it does raise is, why are the different stories coming out of this? Is there any need for different stories to come out of something like this? It's not like groundbreaking end game type evidence, right, at this point in the case. Though for it to be divided and never really cleared up, never in consensus, why is it so fragmented? A scene, an event like this, right? We haven't even got onto that undisclosed place yet. We're still talking about the first spot, the first hit by the dogs. It is very weird, if you ask me. So, I just can't imagine. Right, I'll give you my opinion, okay? Do we need to go onto the map straight away? Do you know what? Let's go onto a different image whilst I explain this. So I feel this photo will best explain what I'm about to say. Okay, so make sure you're focused and listening. The backstory of when this photo was taken was around June the 4th, a flyby when Heavy D and his crew came on down to, I guess, interview Candice Cooley and make sense of what just went down, because it was very close together as the events unfolded, right? So this is the grain shed property, as you see, grain shed down there, grain shed. Brenner's trailer being here, as you can see. Now, my only question is, and I've never asked it before, when Heavy D was present in the area, June 4th, talking to Candice Cooley said, oh yeah, over the hill, over that way is where Brenner's trailer is at. He's a grumpy old man. So this was very early on, before Brenner was taken in. My question is to everyone right now, when Heavy D did the flyby over on that day, as you see here, grain shed property, was Brenner inside of that trailer at this very moment when this footage was recorded? Anyone know? Kind of interesting. You can't really make much out. I mean, you could say that the door on Brenner's camper trailer looks slightly open. So is there a possibility that Brenner was peeking around the door when the plane or helicopter was flying on over? Possibilities, because you can see the gap and the slight darkness from within the trailer. So maybe Brenner was peeking around the door or looking through the window. That's kind of creepy, that. As well, have you noticed that Brenner's got those solar panels nearby to his trailer? Like, what's going on there? Did Brenner have like a TV or anything like that? What were the solar panels used for? You know, anyone know? Feel free to fill in the blanks. Yeah, over here, it doesn't really seem to show up that clearly from this height, but you know, you got the dirt mound over that way where the boots were found. This white truck, which did disappear over time, someone said it belonged to somebody else and that's why it was taken away. But why was it so dragged out? Anyone know? Over here, though, is the grain truck. This is the grain truck, right? And if you look behind it, you can actually clearly see some form of track marks. Hopefully you can see it behind the truck. Most likely caused by the grain truck driving on out. Now, just to explain things once again, The reason why this grain truck is on the outside is because June the 2nd, a couple of days beforehand this footage was taken, it was inside of the grain shed. But because Brenner decided to do spring cleaning June the 2nd, 2022, he had to drive the grain truck out of the grain shed so then there was enough room to start moving stuff about, right? So what I'm thinking is, if the grain truck was parked inside by Dylan, it would have filled most of the room up, correct? If that being the case, then there wouldn't be much room to move about and get on with things. So, I feel that it seems more likely that Dylan was buried here temporarily compared to the idea of Dylan just being killed on the spot and then falling down to the ground and then bleeding out or vomiting. And the reason why I say that, as said, because the grain truck is a fair size and it fills most of the room up inside of the shed, where that grain truck would be parked and reversed in, it would be covering and obstructing where that part of the ground was, which was dug up later. You get what I'm saying? If Dylan was killed inside of the shed, I just don't think there would be enough room round the back for it to happen there. It might have happened more on the side here. You know, like as you reverse in, you get out of the truck, you turn around and then bang, shot by Brenner or something, or ambushed by Brenner, one-on-one confrontation, and then shot, right? And then what would it lead to then? Well, maybe being dragged, right? Explains why the blood was on Brenner's shirt and arms, dragging Dylan's body to the back of the grain shed. But I guess before even doing that, you'd think that the grain truck would have to have been driven out, first of all, to allow space within the shed, and then start maybe digging up a temporary hole to bury Dylan in, like that one as example, but bigger, deeper, right? Putting him in, covering him up, and then maybe reversing the grain truck back into the shed, possibly. And then later on in the day, if not the day after, the 29th, which, as said, 29th of May, has kind of been quiet. Aside from that fishing trip, Brenner and Don supposedly, aside from that suggestion, not much else happened. So it could have been all day spent disposing of Dylan properly, or moving him to a second temporary spot, and then to a final resting spot, if you want to call it that. You get what I'm saying? And during the time, short time, where Dylan may have been buried, where this hole is, right? Bigger, deeper, bleeding out still, possibly, things seeping out of his body, going into the soil, the ground, it being absorbed, Dylan's DNA, scent being present here for a short period of time. When taken away, something is left behind, the scent, the DNA, right? So when the dogs finally come down to this spot later, days on, they can sense something, they can feel something. Well, maybe not literally feel, but that sense of something was once here, possibly a sense of a human. That's why the dogs acted the way they did, right? And that truly is the case. You could say, well, if the dogs are going to react like that under those conditions, which highlight the possibility that it's because of Dylan being within the ground, then if the dogs act the same way elsewhere, such as the undisclosed place, that could be the next burial ground, right? The second attempt, if you want to call it that. I mean, I don't think Brenner has taken anyone out before in the past. So he doesn't really have experience there, okay? Could you say he was a bit indecisive, not knowing maybe the best location to dispose of Dylan? So that's why there was multiple spots, umming and ahhing in between as a possibility. But yeah, I just feel that if there was any DNA, true biological matter to do with Dylan, it would have been because he was buried in the ground here. If it was just a simple case of Dylan getting killed, falling to the ground, and then bleeding out and then it's seeping into the ground. I just can't imagine that being possible because the grain truck was parked in the grain shed, and once it's parked in there, it fills the room up. It fills this entire space. So Dylan wouldn't be able to fall to the ground here because the truck is covered over it, right? So if Dylan did fall, it would be by the side. That's like my thoughts, at least. I just want to know what you think. Be sure to share your thoughts in the chat. Should we do a poll right now, maybe? Yeah, let's do a bit of a general poll and make sure to vote. What it can be. Do you think Dylan Rounds was temporarily buried inside of the grain shed in the ground? You think that's possible? Yes, no, another reason? Feel free to explain it down below. I just want to know your thoughts, right? So you could say, well, if Dylan was buried here, right, but then moved on, does it really matter at the end of the day if forensics weren't tested or done? I think it does still matter. It's a procedure one must follow in a professional manner, and if it's not met or done successfully, it kind of harms the case, right? It kind of makes a bit of a mockery of Dylan's name, and the levels of seriousness is tainted, right? And I guess with this case, it's not just that. There's been other things that have gone on with time and resources delayed and dragged out and not fully utilised at the right moment. So there is that in the background as well, because we're talking about two key hits, two key spots. We'll get to the second one very shortly. And both failed to do forensics. That's bad, right? Because if you got the starting block here where Dylan could have been, then you got a second spot further on. Maybe with some kind of forensics, it could have led to a pattern or a certain direction, right? We don't have directional evidence within the Dylan Rounds case, okay? Well, besides the phone pings, but in terms of tracing where Dylan Rounds is, do we have directional evidence? Not really. So, yeah. I mean, this is the thing. We heard about it in the past with the track marks, right? Track marks being of Dylan's truck possibly in the wash. But with time and people responding in the comments saying, nope, Candice Cooley got it wrong. It was search and rescue. And some others saying, nope, it was Ivor Zadowski, the guy who owns and lives at Lucin Airport. It's like, well, if that's really the case, then what Candice Cooley knows by now, just never really talked about it ever since publicly, right? But why is Candice Cooley so focused on the wash then? Besides those tracks, there must be something else which would direct you to that location, that type of environment, right? If it's not track marks, is it footprints? If it's not footprints, is it a bit of clothing, cloth? You get what I'm saying? There's got to be some evidence to make you think, right, we need to go in that direction and keep on searching there. That's what I would say, at least. When you got Lucin Pond, which seems to be a hot spot, even though Candice Cooley recently has said it's been ticked off the list, despite it being checked more times than other spots, that's where Dylan Rounds' phone was found, dumped in the pond. So there'd be a reason to look around that area because there might be more to it. I guess with that hat being found in recent time, which is questionable to some people, I understand that. That's yet additional possible evidence found nearby, and it's like, what else is around that area, right? Could around that area tie back to what Weezer was suggesting, the second hit, the second spot where the dogs reacted? You never know. I think we just got a couple of photos to finish off with here with the grain shed. So on the left, it was taken later on in the case compared to the one on the right. The left one being by Justin Rounds. So I still wonder, why did Justin Rounds come back to this spot? Why did Justin Rounds come back to this spot? Especially later on at night, was it to reflect back on stuff? Or was it just a moment to look back at where it all started? Right? Possibly. You still see that hole in the background. That never changed. I feel, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel that hole still remains to this day in the grain shed. It's not been moved, disturbed since. There we go, got a little photo of Brenner. This was within the grain shed property too. Now, is this a washing machine? Anyone confirm? I mean, it looks old-fashioned, it looks old. It doesn't look like the type of washing machine I've seen in the UK. I don't see the drum on the front of it, but maybe this is a different one. Or is it a tumble dryer? One or the other. Is this the exact washing machine Dylan Rounds and Don Hately were arguing about? I don't know. Is it in use? Was it usable at the time? The reason why I ask these questions is, why did Brenner... I mean, it's a good thing that he didn't, but I just want to ask the question regardless. Why didn't Brenner burn or clean his top with the washing machine, right? If Brenner, with his shirt covered in Dylan's blood, why did Brenner not make an attempt to dispose of the top, to burn it, destroy it, or to wash the evidence away? Why did Brenner not do that? A bit silly, right? Very silly. I mean, as for the phone, Dylan's phone, okay, it was thrown in the pond for a particular reason to, like avoid being traced back, to possibly destroy the phone and any data evidence on it. You can see that in the mindset of Brenner. As for the deep forensic dive on the phone and retrieving that footage, that might be out of Brenner's knowledge. So you could excuse him on that. He can't know everything. He's not like a criminologist. He's not into forensics. So he's not going to know about how phones and data can be traced despite the phone being destroyed, right? But with a simple shirt with evidence on, common sense would make you think, I think I need to get rid of this because it's incriminating evidence. It links back to me. It's going to get me in trouble. I need to get rid. Yet Brenner didn't. Very silly. And if there are items nearby, like a washing machine, why not use it? Even the washing machine at Dylan's farm, why not use that? There's like a handful of washing machines here and there that should be used, right? Yet they weren't. This photo is just like, well, I don't know who actually took it, but East Idaho News have used it recently. More recently, yeah. I like the image though, and how it's mapped out. You see there, James Brenner's camper was here originally, and in the distance, Dylan's boots were found here, the dirt mound. Now, at the time this photo was taken, that dirt mound, no weeds growing on top from the looks of it. But when we did look at some photos up close by Glorin Dylan back in 2022, you saw a couple of weeds growing in certain spots. So was this photo taken before that or after? Was there anything else of interest here though? A few yellow buckets, the odd few tyres, not much going on there. I mean, there might be little bits of evidence or little stories associated with items which have faded away and never really been talked about since, and there might be a good reason for that. But if there's any stories you've heard of which are very interesting, very suspicious, but never been really covered or brought up again back in discussion, make sure to, list them. List them in the chat, list them in the comment section, wherever, and see what you've got to say, because, I'm sure there'll be people in the chat that have got their own, stories or what they know, supposedly. Is that it for the images? Okay. So what we'll do now, we'll transfer onto the second spot, the undisclosed one, try and make sense of it and use the maps just so we can maybe roughly pinpoint where it could have been. Here is the map of Lucin, Utah satellite imagery. We zoom on in, hopefully it all loads up correctly. Looks like it for now. We're currently facing north, in case you're wondering. Down here being the grain shed property. That's what we were basically looking at before, okay? I just noticed one other thing. When you look at the roofing of the grain shed property, there's like little brown patches, one on that side, two on this side, and it checks out the same as, modern day flyby footage by Heavy D back in 2022. Take in mind this is 2019. Not really changed that much, right? Maybe it's not a surprise to some, but I just wanted to point it out as a little observation. So, if this here was the first hit where the dogs reacted to a scent, some kind of DNA, biological matter, found, not found, whichever one, but there was a possibility, there was an opportunity to get a hold of it from the looks of it, what Candice Cooley has said, from how the dogs have reacted. Though it was a failure at the end of the day, from what she said. Yeah, kind of a mess, right? But if this really was the spot where Dylan Rounds was buried temporarily, the next question would be, where was he moved to next? You could jump the gun and say, oh, well, maybe Dylan Rounds was then moved on to the wash area and buried somewhere up here or further on down. Blah, 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 right? Though, I don't think so. I think there is a second spot, right? The second spot being undisclosed for an important reason, right? With it being undisclosed, it makes you think, why? Why does it need to be undisclosed if nothing was ever found there, right? Makes you think. The only other undisclosed spot was the wash, the specific wash and the exact area of where they were searching in. So could you tie both together? If that really was the case, it would still make me think, why would Dylan Rounds need to be buried 2 times temporarily and then a final resting spot? And more specifically, why on earth would you need to bury Dylan Rounds in the wash and then dig him back up and then move him elsewhere, further down or further up the wash? What's the actual point of that, You get what I'm saying? I can understand, you temporarily bury Dylan in the grain shed property because that's where it all happened and it's enclosed space. It's not on the outside, it's on the inside. Just kind of like conceal things so nothing looks out of the ordinary or odd. And then when you've got more time to think, maybe the following day, that's when you make the decision to uncover Dylan and move him further afar to bury, dispose of, and never be seen again, right? But that doesn't seem to be the case because there was a second hit, a second spot, an undisclosed space, and it's trying to understand where that could be, right? Starting here, and then where did Brenner go then with Dylan? Did he go north, east, southwest, northeast, southwest, northwest? Different possibilities, right? We just don't know. If there's anyone in the chat that does, feel free to share your thoughts, your opinion. If you have coordinates, maybe feel free to reach out if you can. You've got some additional information, feel free. But I just think it's very interesting how we have an undisclosed spot which has never been revealed or explained. And, I can understand an undisclosed spot must be of some significance, right, within the case. They don't want anyone to know. They don't want anyone to go down there and harm it because it could harm the case. But if Candice Cooley said that area was a failure because no forensics were done, anything that was once there was lost, well, there's nothing more to see, is there? So why does the area need to be kept a secret still? Is it because it's close by to another key area which they've been searching all this time, like the wash? You get what I'm saying? I'll be honest with you, I'm going to tie it into a possibility right now. And, you can correct me if I'm wrong. So, is there any other possible directional evidence to suggest where Dylan could have been put? Well, you could tie in the horse tracks of Brenner's horse and Brenner himself going all the way up to the railroad. I don't know how he quite managed to do that, considering you got to cross over the wash and there's a big drop to get onto the other side. Yeah, I don't know how that quite works, but Candice Cooley said she saw horse tracks going up to the railroad. Nobody else has ever seen them, though, or talked about it, which is odd. But if under the conditions Candice Cooley did see what she says, then how I would tie it together is 28th of May 2022, Dylan temporarily buried inside of the grain shed property, right? And then later on in the day, if not more, on the 29th, the day later, Dylan is dug back up. And because the horse will be around this area, inside or out, is then used to transport Dylan's body, possibly, right? That's one way to tie it in with the horse tracks, right? You know, what you can do, well, it sounds a bit serious. What I've experienced was when I was playing Red Dead Redemption in the past, you could, you know, tie someone up and put them on the back of the horse, and then you could ride off into the sunset, right? So the same could have happened here. Though Brenner wasn't really known to ride a horse, but he could still walk with the horse, right? Under those circumstances. So let's say 29th of May, day later, day after Dylan being killed, dug up from the grain shed property, put on the back of Brenner's horse, and then Brenner led the horse up north, up that way, with Dylan like resting on top of the horse, and then somehow crossing on over to get to the other side and somewhere near the railroad tracks. Down here or up that way. This could be somewhere around here, the undisclosed location, right, as to where the dogs reacted, you know? If the dogs reacted a certain way at the grain shed property, and then they acted kind of the same elsewhere, it's like little beacons, temporary burials, you know? Why else, you know, and if it's to do with DNA, scent, why was Dylan just plotted at these certain areas within the land? You know, you wouldn't think Dylan would have been like carried, dragged around, and then just dropped in that one spot like that. No. You wouldn't be just left there out in the open, right? Whether it be for a day or for a couple of hours. Most likely, if you're going to put someone down in a certain area, and obviously they're dead, you're probably going to bury them in that spot, right? So, what are we looking at? A secondary temporary burial? Could be the case, right? Because what else could it be? Why would dogs react consistent over the course of months in an undisclosed spot, right? The level of consistency, it makes you think that there must be more going on there, right? Like higher validity, higher reliability, though it's negatively impacted by the fact that forensics weren't followed up in those areas. My question is, what would have happened if they were followed up? Should we do another poll right now? Make sure to finish voting on the active one at the moment. Okay. So, the next poll can be, if the two final hits, the two key locations where the dogs reacted to, if forensics were followed up and done successfully, would it have led to finding Dylan Rounds? Yes, no. Maybe another option could be, no, it wouldn't, but it would have led to finding more evidence, more items elsewhere. Let me know your thoughts, okay? Does make me think. Now, this is the thing. Whilst we are hovering around in this area, okay? This area roughly being where horse tracks were supposedly found by Candice Cooley, associated with Brenner's horse. The horse went in one direction, Brenner went in the other. Don't quite understand that still to this day, but that's what supposedly happened. Now, was the horse tasked with disposing of Dylan Rounds independently? Likely not. But could the horse have helped transport Dylan to a desired spot for a burial? Quite possibly, right? I don't know what size the horse was of Briscoe, Brenner's horse. Not quite sure what breed either, but I'm sure it would have been able to carry Dylan. Dylan wasn't too heavy, right? It was about 145 to 165 pounds or something like that. And how tall was he? 5 foot. I mean, that varies as well. 5'10" up to 6 foot. You got to take in mind though, if that really was the case, even if we put aside the burial factor and we just focus on Brenner himself supposedly walking his horse from the grain shed property up to the railroad tracks, would it have been practical? As we've seen recently, most recently in the courtroom, June 5th, when Brenner was at the court hearing, yes, he was wearing chains, it restricted his movement, but he still looked like he was limping, it still looked like he was in some kind of pain and discomfort. If he's like that there, what was he like in the middle of a desert where it's rocky, uneven terrain, where there's rocks you could trip over, do your leg in, where the surfaces could be a bit uneven in spots and a little bit slippery. You know, you've got loose gravel, right? Different possibilities there. Do you honestly think Brenner would be walking a horse all the way down to here? As for the mileage, how far is it? Sometimes what you got to take in mind is there'll be areas where it's not great in distance, but it's great in time because it's an awkward spot to get to, right? 3,000 foot away from grain shed to the railroad tracks, right? Let's click that off. Not that far away at all, but you've got to descend into the wash, and the wash is kind of deep. So you're going to go down, up and over, or down and over. I just don't think so. Yes, you can go into the wash a little bit more accessible down here because the road seems to drive directly within the wash. But that means going the long way. And is Brenner going to go that far by walking? Probably not. Because the talk was that on the 28th, that when Brenner went to Don's place for the barbecue, Brenner drove to Don's place, right? Could you say Brenner is lazy there? I mean, I guess it just depends the distance of Don's place, right? Some say it's very nearby, others don't. But if it's equal distance or kind of near to the same amount of distance, time taken to get from grain shed to railroad tracks and grain shed to Don's place, kind of relevant to one another, then maybe a truck was used at the end of the day. Now, was the horse scenario though just to do with parting ways? You know, we did hear that the horse did get passed on to Taylina, Kurt Wadsworth, and then it was passed on again. But the initial first transaction made was that to do with meeting up at the railroad tracks. Brenner with the horse, Kurt Wadsworth nearby, or Taylina ready to pick the horse up. Makes you think maybe that could be the explanation for that. Though, as we have heard more so in recent time, whether it be by Candice Cooley or mentioned on some official documents here and there, what we've looked at online, is that a range of different services were used when looking for Dylan, including horseback, search and rescue, horseback, right? So it could have been them that caused the track marks near the railroad tracks and not Brenner's horse. So there is always that. Though, end of the day, there is no harm in searching around this area because considering roughly me and the assistance of another individual were able to locate the wash, which was undisclosed for quite some time, right? The track marks being found there, saying that following on, that's where Dylan could have been taken, right? And we were able to find it when just casually looking on the maps, and I was able to find more of interest and tie it all in to get a better understanding. If it could be done there blindly, maybe it's happening right now. You never know. Sometimes when I'm hovering over a certain spot, right, it could be a place of interest. It could be the undisclosed location. And I will say one more thing. I mean, it can apply if you're actually within the area, okay? But can you cover all that distance in a matter of seconds? No. Can I cover all the distance in Lucin in a matter of seconds? Yes, because I'm looking at satellite imagery. But you know what the creepiest thing is about this? Is that all these months of me talking and using the maps, at any point, any moment, I could have just zoomed on in to a particular spot like here, and I could have just been talking randomly or telling a story, making sense of the case. And to my lack of understanding or awareness, I could have been zoomed in at the exact spot where Dylan Rounds is currently buried. You get what I'm saying? At the time, you're not going to know. You'll only know when it's too late. But it's just weird how, whilst being on satellite imagery, you can be just scouring the land like this, dragging your finger across, looking over the land and the vastness, and you could just zoom into one spot and be completely unaware that that is where Dylan Rounds is buried at, and still is to this day. That is what is creepy. It is kind of creepy, that. Just for context, in case anyone has joined in last minute or didn't quite understand that or misinterpreted it, I'm not saying that this is where Dylan is at right now. I'm just saying that there's possibilities of I could have zoomed into the spot where he's buried but wouldn't even know until it's too late and like the family, police, search and rescue have found him, right? Just a weird feeling. So, undisclosed location, second hit, dogs over the course of months all reacting the same way would make you think that Dylan's traces were in that particular spot, right? But how and why? Well, with the Grainshed property, the suggestions are Dylan killed on the spot in that location, falling to the ground leads to things seeping out of his body or mouth and absorbing into the ground. Although I kind of debunked that myself earlier on in this video, it's more plausible that than this undisclosed location, which could be in the middle of the desert. And if it is in the middle of the desert, why are Dylan's traces in that particular spot? Is it because when Brenner, or maybe Don, was helping to dispose of Dylan Rounds, was Dylan just rolled to the ground and left there temporarily whilst they were thinking of where to go next? You get what I'm saying? Why would Dylan's traces need to be within the ground, within the dirt, for the dogs to react in that way, or like some kind of scent? If Dylan was properly being transported elsewhere, why would he end up in the middle of the desert? You get what I'm saying? You'd only end up in the middle of the desert if that's the spot you're going to be buried at, right? And if that was the case, then you could think, well, maybe this was the second burial zone being another temporary one. And the reason why it's a temporary one is because when they did investigate that spot, the second hit, nothing was found there. Yeah, okay, forensics weren't done in time, so that was a waste. But I'm sure they searched for it or kind of dug it up, right? I mean, as for the Grainshed property, that's literal proof because we've seen the photos of the hole, right? So you'd think if the dogs acted in a particular way at the Grainshed, as they did with the undisclosed place, then they must have dug up the hole at the undisclosed place as well, right? Does that make sense? Yeah, weird. And obviously, that being the case, wherever Dylan's scent is or DNA within the ground and you dig it up, but you don't find Dylan, it just must be a once burial spot of Dylan. You get what I'm saying? I guess the ultimate question is, how many more, temporary burials are out there associated with Dylan? I don't know. It can't be that many, right? It can't take that many attempts to try and dispose of Dylan, right? Though, even if it did, for good reason in their eyes, because it supposedly worked out, because Dylan has not been found yet. I mean, you think about it, if those were burial spots, the Grainshed, well, that was uncovered, right? Hole dug up, something retrieved, or maybe not, but a potential spot. But the police, the family, search and rescue, whoever, caught wind of it fairly quick for the dogs to react the way they did in that spot. Same applying to that undisclosed second location. The dogs, sniffed it out, found it, right? So it's like you tick it off the list. One down, next spot to go, right? What about the third zone, the third area? That's not been located by the dogs yet. And I guess as time goes on, right, the scent, evidence, parts of it, remains can fade away with time, right? Because it can't last there forever. Dylan's actual remains can, remain as they are, like in skeletal format, but like I was saying, traces of blood, maybe traces of vomit, traces of DNA, scent from Dylan can fade away with time. Application being put with the Kenny Veach case, okay? Kenny Veach, a missing hiker, I think about 47 years of age or 48 at the time of going missing in Nevada, the Mojave Desert. Was it December the 10th? Was it November 10th? Something like that. But basically, Kenny Veach went out there, a few days passed, and it was a lie, because it turned out to be 8 days later when he was eventually reported missing. And by the time the search and rescue went out there, they did use dogs, cadaver dogs, and were able to locate Kenny Veach's scent after 8 days later of him going missing. But once they got up to the mine shaft, where they found a few items, the scent was lost from there on, and the dogs weren't able to continue any further. Why is that? Well, as time goes on, the scent can wear away. And if that can happen within an 8-day period of a person going missing in the desert, and then you apply it to the Dylan Rounds case, an individual that has been missing for over a year now, you get what I'm saying? If dogs start going out now, is it gonna be as successful? No. They can still find Dylan, but as for traces and scents to actually follow a clear path, a direction to the burial spot, it just seems very hard, right? Very difficult. And I guess the thing is, when it comes with cadaver dogs, besides drones, cadaver dogs can be very useful and very helpful. But of course, most effective when used at the right place, the right time, and as soon as possible. Within the Dylan Rounds case, were the dogs used as soon as possible? See, this is the thing, another inconsistency. Candice Cooley kept referring back in the past to saying how the dogs weren't utilised in the early days, that the police were delaying the bloodhound groups from being used because of precipitation, the rain, which reduces the success rate of dogs sniffing out Dylan's scent down to 20% success. But it's still a chance. Why can't they do it? Well, they had their reasons, which could be seen as excuses. It was dragged out, right? So at what actual point were the dogs fully used? Can anyone explain? If there's anyone in the chat right now, very important question. At what point, what date, what year were the cadaver dogs used properly for the very first time in the Dylan Rounds case? Were they used in June 2022, July 2022, November, December 2022? I want to know your thoughts, because the only time I ever heard about dogs actually being used was before winter time, during the big push before winter, when Mob Crew Chris, Candice Cooley, Justin Rounds, Texas Equisearch and the K9 unit went down to the wash to look for Dylan Rounds. That's the only time I heard about dogs being used. And then fast forward on till 2023, where they were talking about K9 cadaver dogs being used again. That's really the only other time, right? And then to hear about it a few weeks ago, that over the course of months, that cadaver dogs were utilised in the area and found 2 final hit spots, which reacted in a certain way to hint that Dylan could have been once there, or remnants of Dylan in some way or another. It seems like they have been used more than once. But when Candice Cooley said, for months, the dogs have been acting a certain way in these undisclosed location, what does Candice Cooley mean by as months gone on? What, since the beginning of 2023, months on throughout those months in 2023, the dogs were used? Or does she mean months in terms of in the early days of the case? For so many months in 2022, the dogs reacted like this. There's a lack of context, right? The provenance is lacking in a way. Not great. So it's kind of a guessing game trying to make sense of it. Hopefully people in the chat kind of like understand what I'm getting at here. You know, if for whatever reason we can like pinpoint the true spot where Dylan could be at, right? Or where Dylan was next placed after the grain shed, okay? That could be very useful. Candice Cooley, you know, if we're saying that that's where Dylan was temporarily buried at least, you know, you could say that you might be able to follow a direction. You know, you pinpoint grain shed as spot 1, pinpoint the second spot, the final hit, as spot 2, and then just see what direction does it follow in. What are each locations near to? Anything of interest? Do they follow the same direction as the wash? Are they in parallel to it? Are they nearer to the railroad tracks in parallel to that? Is it going in like an opposite direction? You know, if we could just figure that out, then maybe it could lead to some kind of directional evidence, right? I mean, when we made sense of the wash, pinpointing it properly, you know, many months on, right? It took under a year or so to find it, and you could say, well, that wasn't efficient, was it? That took you a long time to work that out, Warlike Ref. The only reason why it took that long is simply because I never knew of that Facebook post, which was done back in, what was it, June the 5th, I think. Was it a post June the 5th or was it June the 8th? Basically, around the very early stages of when Dylan went missing, that's when the Facebook post was done by Candice Cooley, who was talking about that flyby over where the track marks were found in the wash. Now, if I was aware of those track marks, that wash, that video, that post on Facebook at the time, if I was looking at it, then obviously I probably would have worked it out a lot quicker. It's just depending when you receive certain material, right? That's what external humans in the background fail to understand at times, that, you know, some things are figured out later down the line because not all the material was present at that moment, right? Sometimes it's like pieces of a jigsaw. You find bits as you go along and then you can work it out down the line and piece it all together to get a bigger picture and a bigger understanding. And maybe we are still in that phase of finding jigsaw pieces to complete the puzzle. I guess it's a matter of time and a question as to what will be found next. You know, I'm glad I was able to get this video out and do it in the first place, because although it's just talking about a singular thing, a certain theme, topic within the case, it's such an important one, right? And yeah, something like this could have been done earlier on in the case, but as said, I only heard this from Candice Cooley a couple of weeks ago on that East Idaho News Channel interview. So although it may have happened in the past about these final hit spots, I only heard about it recently, so why did it take that long? I don't know. But I guess it is what it is, and it's just been covered now. You know, we briefly touched upon this in a past video when we were doing the summary analysis by Candice Cooley, the interview. But I said, sometimes it's really necessary to do these focused videos on particular parts in the case, right? And yeah, okay, this video was not short, right? Wasn't short, but it was focused on a particular thing, okay? You will get, maybe not so much now, but in the past you would have got live streams, call-ins, long videos, 2 hours to 10 hours long, talking about a lot of different things, right? Too much to process and handle, right? I don't quite go to that extreme, right? I don't really do short videos either, so maybe some aren't too pleased with that. But I can definitely lock on and focus at one thing at a time, even if the video is long. I think the length of the video isn't as problematic. As long as it's focused on just a couple of subjects, if not just one, then it's just easier to follow. But if you're talking about 20 different things in a 10-hour long video, whoa, too much. But then again, equally, if you're talking about 20, 30 different things in a 10-minute video, you know, it's too vague. So you got to get the balance there. So hopefully most people understood what we were talking about today. As said, make sure to like the video, click the like button down below, whether you want to get whipped or not, because ultimately, more importantly, it will help spread awareness of this video. And I think it's really needed because even that Dylan wasn't found in these particular spots. My question is, saying once again, why is there a divide? Why does Candice Cooley say no forensics were done, nothing was retrieved, it was a failure? Then you got the shack lady and supposedly Candice Howard saying that things were found in these areas. Why the divide? I don't quite understand or follow, considering one or the other is in contact with Candice Cooley. Why they're coming out with different things? I don't quite understand. So if you do have any additional comments, any additional points, feel free to list it down below, okay? You know, if you've got questions, list them down below. If you've got your own list of ideas from this whole video, make sure to list them down below. It'll help keep the case alive and maybe generate new ideas, and it might help people in between watching right now learn something else in between, right? So yeah, I did say that I was going to look at an article, but because I think this video was so focused on the particular thing, I don't want to take that away from it. So we can look at the article in the next video if it's a bit more loose and casual when looking at the Dylan Rounds case, okay? But just glad I was able to get this one done today. As said, the previous one, the body language analysis of Brenner, in terms of performance, in terms of outreach and just stretch to people learning about it, arguably underwhelming. But then again, if about 14,000 people have watched it from the East Idaho News Channel perspective, they probably see no real need in checking my video, which I do understand, though my video looks at the body language of it, which no one else has done, right? I think Lance Kelly did some kind of coverage of the court hearing. I think he might have used closed captions or some kind of subtitles to make it easier to read and follow, because I know audio was lacking. It wasn't as good, the quality or the volume. So I guess that's useful and unique in its own way. But no one has done a body language analysis of Brenner. And I will highlight it once again because I think it's arguably one of the most important videos about Brenner, which not a single human has attempted on Earth. Is to do with the motives behind Brenner, right? I shared it to TikTok, my coverage on it from YouTube. I had to break it down because TikTok has a limit to how long a video can be. Hardly anyone viewed it, about 1 to 200 people on part 1, 400, part 2, 200, part 3, 100, part 4, 150. Very poor, piss poor, very poor. And it's like, this is important. This is a deep look into Brenner. This is possibly highlighting the motives for what he did. And you need to learn about a possible killer for why they did it to prevent them from doing it in the future, right? Or to prevent other people that may demonstrate the same patterns and behavior, right? It's important. And yet humans out there, not here, humans here, most part of them are good. As for the regular viewers, very good. But I'm talking about just everyday other humans out there who aren't even aware of this. They should be aware. These are motives. These are key, deep reasoning and psychological thoughts used associated with Brenner, looking at the backstory, looking at how he's acted in the past and applying it to real time now. You know, maybe I can put some links in the chat right now if I can find them quick enough, or maybe down below in the comment section. But if any of you watching right now, whether you're new to the case or new to my channel, make sure to check those videos out. I think it was all done in one video, to be honest, but make sure to check them out. Very important, looking at the psychological aspect of Brenner, his mind and his motives to what he did. Yes, people can just briefly throw it in and say, snap, snap, that's all it is. There's deeper reasons behind it, deeper rooted, with many important factors to take in mind. I've documented it all, I've covered it all on my channel. So make sure to check those videos out. Hopefully the links will be down below. be sure to check them, right? That aside, we've done what we've done today. If there is a follow-up, then we follow up on it. If not, maybe we can focus another area of interest. Maybe I can revisit the wash, but actually map it out with lines so you can actually follow it more clearly and easier to measure, possibly. I've not really reused my past projects for a long time, but then again, it depends if it links to what I'm talking about now, not always. But no harm in looking back, right? So we'll see what happens next. Time will tell. I'm sure something will happen to a certain degree. Predictions are still, some are pending, others have been predicted correctly, right? The last form of predictions I used, which were right, I don't know, there could have been some in between, but the last ones I remember was when I was talking about the anniversary and how things would follow there. I got that right. Do I have any predictions right now? Not really. My latest prediction was to do with last night, I think, or the night before, with Bob Farrell, right? Saying how Bob Farrell could end up being manipulated down the line and thrown under the bus. Maybe like other people have been with time. So that's what I think. That's what I think is a possibility. I said time will tell in different areas. We'll see. Leave comments down below. Feel free to like the video and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. That's it for now. Goodbye and good night. And this time it should be a good night and I should be able to sleep without being called down to the shed. Okay? Miss T, don't be ringing your Daisy cowbell anytime soon. Okay? Good night.